Welcome to this episode of Harvey County Talk. As always, I'm your host, Lance Gormley. Our guest on the program today is Fred Van Ranken, who is the Superintendent of USD 373 Schools. How are you doing today, Fred?
I am well.
Good, very good. Thank you for coming out on the program. I appreciate it. I know that sometimes this isn't for everybody, and being on camera sometimes makes people a little nervous, but you get to do that pretty much every, 2 weeks?
Yes.
So you're probably better at it than most, would you say?
Not even in the ballpark. Not something I aspire to be doing.
It's just part of it in this digital age, right? It's funny to think that when you started out, there probably wasn't all of this digital stuff, and then now everything you say is captured on camera.
Yes.
Yes.
And every district does things a little differently. In my previous district, they did not want to stream meetings or anything because they wanted the ability to speak freely.
Yes. Yeah. And then there's always the social medias where everybody's watching, even though they're not present, and they have their 2 cents to say, right?
At least two.
Yeah, at least two. Sometimes
two.
More.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. Well, as anybody knows, this is a wonderful opportunity that we have that for our community to have people come out and talk to me on the program. I'm really interested in you, Fred. I don't know you very well outside of this, so we'll just get a chance to get to know you personally as well as everybody in the community when they watch the programs. That sound good?
Whatever.
All right. All right. Okay, so something that I usually try to start out with is just a little bit of understanding of who you are, where you came from, maybe where you were born, if you want to go that far back, your school years, et cetera, where you went to college and all that. So I guess the first question that I always ask is, where do you hail from, Fred?
Well, originally born in Anthony, Kansas, actually. Okay. I'm a Kansas guy for the most part.
All right, Kansas.
Born in Anthony, was there for a year, moved to Twin Falls, Idaho until I was in third grade. So came back to Kansas in a little town called Isabel, north of Medicine Lodge. So we call Medicine Lodge home.
Okay.
Both my wife and I were both from there. We were childhood sweethearts and all that wonderful nonsense that takes place when you're young, which I no longer am.
Yeah.
But went to Hutchinson Community College after high school, then went to Kansas State University, became an educator. Actually, the first year, and even during college, I worked construction. I worked different types of jobs, but I worked residential construction. In my first year out of college, I was going to just do residential construction. I really loved building houses. I loved running heavy equipment, doing all aspects of anywhere from framing to the other aspects of that with concrete and all that other stuff, and running front-end loaders. But then somebody gave me the bright idea to use that education degree that I received.
Right,
So I jumped in private Catholic school was my first job of teaching at Sacred Heart Junior Senior High in Salina. Great place to teach, wonderful place to start out as an educator. And if you didn't enjoy eating, it would be a great place to still be, because I went to the public system a year later and doubled my salary.
Right.
I went from $12,000 all the way to $24,000 in 1980. It would have been 1989. So
very cool.
I've been in education ever since on the public side. I believe it's 37 years now.
Wow.
Been on the dark side of education, on the administrative side, since 1997.
Okay.
I've been real fortunate. I've had great mentors along the way. One of the interesting things, my first step on the dark side was after being a high school science teacher at Solomon, Kansas. I was there for 8 years and was a football coach and some other coaching aspects as well, which I really enjoyed. Went to St. John Junior Senior High for 2 years. A great place. I was a 7-12 administrator.
Okay.
I decided after being at a 7th grade C-team girls basketball tournament, after having supervised all week long except for a Wednesday night, that being a 7-12 administrator is not what I wanted to do, because I never saw my family.
Yeah.
So then I went to Lindsborg for 17 years. I was a high school principal there for 7, and for the remaining 10, I was what they called the director of student learning. One of the positive aspects of the Brownback years was with budget cuts that we incurred and with the recession. I was actually placed half-time back in the classroom too. So it was really a perfect job. I was teaching chemistry half the time, and then I was doing my administrative duties the other half. So it was a time of evolution for me as an administrator, because I was able to really see the light side and the dark side of how administration and then the practical application of the director position of student learning with curriculum assessment and programming, how I could kind of more walk the walk as it relates to education. So
I got a question. So when it comes, you mentioned two things: the dark light side and the dark side, right?
Yes.
When you started in education, you mentioned chemistry. You're a science teacher. Is that what you got your education degree in?
It was. Yeah, okay. I was actually biology certified, but when I went to Sacred Heart my first year, I actually had like 6 preps or 7 preps. I can't remember. It was so long ago. All the way from 7th grade science to AP biology. So when I was at Solomon, I taught biology, chemistry, physics, general science, and then I also taught an applied physics course too. Okay. I was never certified to teach physics, but it didn't matter. Back in those days, you taught what they told you to in small schools. Yeah. So,
Okay, so when you're talking about science and whatnot, and being an educator, are you just a science guy? I mean, you like science in general?
Science. Okay. Yes, I do.
Okay, so it's you want to be an educator, you want to teach and waking up science in young people's hearts, minds, and lives, right? But
absolutely.
But science is your thing.
I really enjoy science. Really, being an educator is my thing too. Yes. I want to see kids be successful. I think one of my drives in being on the dark side of things was my frustration was I felt like in every one of the situations I was in, I couldn't make the impact that I wanted to make at the level that I wanted to make it.
Okay.
I think I was a good teacher. Some of my former students may beg to differ, but I always felt like as a building, I never wanted to be an administrator. I want to be real clear. I went and got an administrative certificate because the individual who was a mentor of mine, who was my high school principal as an employee, he was actually my high school principal when I was a student. It was really kind of a neat situation. And he just told me, if you're going to because I was going to get an advanced degree because I wanted to move over on the salary schedule. Yeah. He said, get one at administration. I said, look, Bernard, there's no way that I will be a principal. I don't want to do what you guys do. It's a stupid thing to do. Yeah. And so I did it anyway.
Because, mentors do that kind of stuff. They challenge you to do things you don't want to do because they see something in you that you don't necessarily see.
100%. And I've been real fortunate in that regard. Yeah. So I received that degree, I believe it was in 94. And then 97, I decided to go ahead and utilize that. I worked in, like I said, in St. John. And what was really cool, my first superintendent that I worked for, and I've had some really good soups that I worked for as an administrator, was a gal by the name of Dr. Betty Summers. She's retired, lives in Salina now, and just a wonderful mentor. She really, really helped me understand the aspects of the educational administration side of things that I thought were going to be easy and didn't recognize the difficulty of overcoming, and was just really, really on point with a lot of that. And I still speak with her today a little bit. She's a great mentor that I had back in the day. Yeah.
So when you made the, at some point you talked about being able to switch over. I love how you say the light side and the dark side. I love it, right? Because that's kind of a teacher's perspective, generally speaking. Is I'm here to do my job. I'm here to educate kids, and then there's the bureaucracy.
There is,
right? So when you did that, and you had mentioned that it was because of a mentor in your life encouraging you to do so. Just take me back to when you started to walk down that path, you began to get that education. Was it what you had always perceived it to be, or by getting into that, you realized, there might be something more here?
My master's work in educational administration, with the exception of 1 or 2 classes, probably had the largest influence on me educationally than any other courses that I took, whether they were science or whatever. And that was mainly because of the different professors I had at Kansas State University. There was a Dr. Bailey, Dr. Shoup, and others, Dr. G. Kent Stewart, that really motivated me to want to learn more about learning more about helping kids from a system perspective. And also school communities. I mean, I'm a small school guy. This is a large school district. People want to say Newton's not a big district. Well, when you've been around anywhere from 1A to 4A schools, Newton is one of the 64 largest schools in the state of Kansas, right? I mean, so when you think about that, we're not a small district. We're not a big district either compared to your 259s or your Goddards or some of those others. But we have a lot of things that are accessible to us. So, going down that path, thinking about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do that, I never saw this as an endpoint, right? I have always felt that as an administrator, or even as a teacher, that we are not doing the things that we need to do in the system to really allow kids to maximize their potential. There's too much of a system bias. It's too much about the system and not about working individually, to make sure that kids are maximizing their capacity. And we're also enhancing the aspects of the community. So that master's work that I did, because of that influence, helped me become such a better teacher. And it was so much fun. I really, really enjoyed that. That's when I was teaching at Solomon, and I had some great kids. We were a small school. We were 1A. We had 8-man football and all that other jazz. But I just really, I think, came into my own as an educator during that phase that helped transition me on that dark side, because I wanted to make a difference first at that building level. And it's not that I got frustrated at the building level, but I got frustrated at the building level because I thought as a district we should be able to do more. So transitioning to that director position, because I said I was never going to be a superintendent. Who in their right mind would do something like that? Because I don't like politics. I just hate politics, and it shouldn't enter into what we do. But it does, and we have to come to that realization, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to steer the system in a way that's benefiting students. Because that is why I'm here. I am here to serve students. I am here to serve their interests. I always make the joke about I want them paying my Social Security, because I want them paying my Social Security. We're only going to be as good as the kids that we're helping to raise. Right?
Our future is our children in every way, shape, or form.
And there was a saying we put up on the board walls at Smoky Valley, another place that I was there for 17 years and just loved the place. But the saying was, and it was in front of the board members, they were looking at that anytime they made a decision, and it was, our future's created by what we do in this room. And I just really firmly believe that we are creating our future by the decisions we make, and that's why we've got to make sure we keep the things out that aren't related to student progress.
So would you? I'm hearing you. I might have said this already, but you're striking me as somebody who has the heart of a teacher, right? And then from there, because of when you're a teacher, you're right there in the room, right? That's your peripheral. That's just right there in the room, educating those students on a specific subject matter, and that's your job. That's your heart. But then when you go into administration, you realize that at that point, there's way more that goes into the policy making aspect, and not to say policy making, because that's reserved for your school board members, but the application of that and the information that goes back in between the leadership, such as a superintendent, principal versus a school board. I mean, is that kind of what I guess I'm trying to get a grasp on? Say you started in as a principal, so not a superintendent. So you were
no
on a
desire,
team, right?
No desire to be a superintendent.
So then, how was being a principal different from being a teacher?
From at each, you hate to say step up the ladder, because it's not always a step up the ladder, right? I mean, if your heart is that of a teacher and you're satisfied with that, you need to continue doing that. If you feel like your sphere of influence is where whoever puts you there is where you should be, then you need to stay there. I always felt like I could have a little bit bigger impact on the system from other positions.
Okay.
But the further away you are removed from the classroom, the further away you are removed from kids. And the ability to form that level of trust with those kids diminishes a great deal. That's one of the issues that I struggle with here, is I don't know a lot of students, right? I mean, even in my previous district, I had 2 small schools. We had 580 kids total in the district, right? 150 in one in a pre-K-12 setting, and then the remainder of those kids were in the pre-K-12 setting in the other facility. But I knew a lot of the kids. I knew a lot of the families. I mean, because I was heavily involved, was able to, in their lives, because there wasn't a lot else to do in those 2 communities but school things. Here, there's a lot of other things that are accessible. We've got, 700 and some staff. That's more than I had in kids. Right? So, I mean, each supposed step up the ladder is a step removed from kids. You know you're not going to be able to form those same types of relationships and have that same type of capacity to influence at that individual level. What you hope and pray is that the things that you're able to do put those people that are in that position in such a manner that they are able to maximize their influence in a positive way on those kids, so that they realize their potential.
Yeah.
And so, the further up, the further removed, and it's a shame on the one hand, but every once in a while you go by and get a kid fix, man. I mean, you go up to the high school, and I'll go up to the high school a lot because I'm a high school guy. I was mainly there, and it's fun, like in the mornings when they're coming into the buildings. And it's fun at any of them. I'll sometimes go to a school for lunch or something. Yeah. It's harder to do, frankly, than it was in my previous district that was smaller.
Yeah, when you get into the administrative duties, like you said, that's just, your relationship is more focused on staff than it is the kids.
Staff, policy, process, procedures, how we are making sure the programming we are providing for our staff to influence those kids is what they need from a research-based perspective to do that. Yeah. I mean, and that's difficult sometimes because it goes contrary to what is actually happening sometimes.
Well, and then you mentioned, and I'd like you to rest on something and just explain a little bit more in detail to me. There was a point in time in which you were doing both, right? And you said that was the just really where you felt the best suited was to be able to have, teaching part-time and then also doing administrative duties. And that was such a small school, maybe at that time, that you could do that?
It was a 4A high school. I mean, it wasn't, we had 1,000 kids, so it was a third this size. And that's what folks don't understand when you start thinking about the A's, what that means, right? But we were a third this size. And because of budget cuts, it's one of those things. My administrative duties didn't change. I still had to do all of those, but I was a teacher for halftime. And then that was 8 of the last 10 years of my career there. And 5 of those I was also coaching. So that was a cherry. That was the perfect job. Yeah. And what an idiot. I always share, I always make comments, you lose 30 IQ points, each rung up the ladder. Right. So I lost another 30 and became a superintendent. Right. So, but it was really fun. Because I was able to get that kid fixed on a daily basis, right? I was able to form those relationships. And like I said, not all students like all teachers. So I'm sure that there were those that didn't enjoy, my class or whatever. But I just really felt it was a wonderful opportunity for me, and it was just so darn much fun. Yeah. Because I'm at that age now where, some of my kids are in their early 50s, right? Mid 50s. Yeah. And so, some of my former students. So it's kind of fun to see how they've evolved and how we've kept in touch. And you never lose that connection, even though that was during a short period in their lives. Yeah. Those that valued the contribution that you made. And that's one of the reasons you do it. It's not a requirement, but it is darn sure one of the indirect paychecks you get in the business. And you don't get that in an administrative role a lot at the district office level. Building principal, there are opportunities for that, but if you think about it, and even at my level, I tell students when I see them, if you're in my office, it's either a really good thing or a really bad thing. I was going to say, Same thing in a principal's office, right? Yeah. But in a principal's office, a lot of times you have a thing called lunch or in a principal's position, and you're one supervising lunch, so you get to meet those kids, you get to know them more. Yeah. You do spend a lot more time with your students that struggle. Whether it's behavior or academically, usually on the behavior side as an administrator, but you do lose sight or lose touch somewhat with that student population because you're the enforcer, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting you say that because I could remember, you made the comment that, well, not all my students probably thought I was a good teacher or, some of them thought I was a great teacher. And me personally, I struggled as a youth going to school and stuff for a lot of different reasons. But teachers, I think oftentimes underestimate the impact that they have on the kids that they're teaching. And I'll say this, I spent a lot of time getting to know my principal. I did. And the few that, I had over my time or whatever. And it's interesting that you say that, because for somebody that's like in my position, somebody that just really just struggled going, during those teenage years and whatnot, it almost felt like the relationships that I can remember the most that had the greatest impact on me for the better, right, wrong, or indifferent, were from my administrators, my principals.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that when you're in the principal's office, it's either for a really good reason or a really bad reason because you're the enforcer.
Mm-hmm.
But did you notice that as time changed, that and you became an administrator or principal, that those youth that you did have at your doorstep were the ones that you personally were able to make the greatest impact, like how I
Sure.
experienced?
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I went from the principal's office to the director position, a student who had struggled, and she wasn't a great student academically necessarily, and she struggled quite a bit in one of the science classes. She was taking a chemistry class from a colleague, and she wrote me this wonderful note that said, "Hey, I would never have made it. I'm going to miss you as a principal. I would never have made it through chemistry without you.
Yeah.
I appreciate all the help you gave me, even though I struggled." Something to that effect.
Yeah.
And so, when I was struggling, making that transition out of that building, because those first 2 years in that director role, I was not in the building anymore.
Yeah.
I'd pull out that letter and read it every once in a while. Remember, this is the reason why you're here, is to make sure that whoever is doing that in that building has the opportunity to do that. You're empowering them with what they need to have and the resources. Because, you had mentioned, you had relationships with your principal a lot. I'll say I did as well back in my small hometown. But I also had some amazing teachers.
Yeah.
There was Vernon Buell was one of my math teachers, and I can remember him always just chewing me all the time about Dadgummit Van Ranken, get your feet wet, because
Right.
I wasn't a bad student, but I struggled seeing relevance in some of the stuff that we
Yes.
were doing.
Yeah.
And I'm one that if I don't see relevance, why am I going to waste my time on
Application.
what you're trying to sell me?
Yes.
That got me in trouble a few
Yes.
times, but I had great math teachers, science teachers, a home ec teacher, Charlene Larson was instrumental in teaching me skills that I didn't know that I needed to have,
Yep.
like how to sew on a button or
Right.
do some minor cooking
Yeah.
and things of that nature. A lot of my coaches were very instrumental too. So that's one thing that folks forget, I think, is that those teachers are. There was you remember the Wonder Years.
Yes.
Okay. And
I
I
remember
say
Wonder
this
Years.
to all of the first year teachers, and usually here in Newton, I've said it at the new teacher breakfast, or at the orientation that we have with them. Danica McKellar, who is Winnie Cooper from
Yes.
the Wonder Years, she's also a mathematician, and she's written several different books.
Okay.
And me being a podcast junkie, I've listened to a podcast, Science Friday, now for I don't know how long.
All right, cool.
It's been around forever. And I'd have to go back and look at the year because I have it documented someplace. But she was in there talking about science and just talking about teachers. And she made a statement, and I was on a bicycle ride on some country road someplace, and she said, teachers are like angels. They're the face of the subject.
Yeah.
And if you, if you're good, the kids will love the subject. And if you're not approachable, they're not going to like the subject.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow,
Yeah.
wow. That's
profound.
It's very profound.
Yes.
And when I hear those things, and I've actually got a recording of that I will play sometimes in presentations, because we are the face of that subject. If you've got a mean math teacher, you're not going to like math.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
That's just terrible.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between being a discipline-oriented individual and being mean.
Yeah.
I don't want mean.
Yeah.
I want discipline. Yes, I do. I don't want mean, because we don't know where those kids are coming from. They may have enough mean in their life. They don't need another one. Don't add, man. So let's make sure that whatever we're doing, we are the face of that institution we're representing, or that content area.
Yeah.
And we're imparting the skills those kids and knowledge those kids to need to be successful. I don't want productive people. I want happy, productive people.
Yeah.
I want them to be well-rounded. I want them to have realize their capacity, and it's theirs, not ours.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, just resting on the teacher thing. I was thinking as you were talking and stuff, and I can remember when in school, it was like all the teachers that other kids didn't like. I thought they were the greatest teacher in the world, and then the teachers that everybody liked, I was like, I don't know about that person, or whatever the case may be. But as I grew up, you talk about application of education, and that's just paramount. And then, two things. Another one is that you don't know where a child is coming from in their life, and boy, teachers. Man, I pray for our teachers. I do, because I realize that, especially now more than ever, with youth dealing with so many different things, that has changed since I was a kid, more so since you were a kid today, having youth in school and stuff. It's hard. And I tried to make sure that with my own children, they understand that, don't let this time pass you. Because what's going to happen is you're going to regret. I promise you will regret that, because you don't see how this education is going to be applicable in your life right now. It will be later, and I'll give a testament to that. I'm not a math person, but surprisingly, I'm actually really good at math. And when I was growing up, it was that I could never see the relevance and application, but I got enough of it, right? And then I did the Brooks Trade Center there at Newton High School at Hutchinson Community College, and we did what we called shop math, I'll call it that. But it's interesting how much algebra and geometry and all these things that I didn't know. I couldn't pronounce the words practically, and I'm thinking I have no desire to ever know that. But then when it became applicable, and I could build something, and I knew that I could build something of quality, and that it took all of these skills that at one point in time I took for granted, is an amazing thing. So
100%.
So I just got to say that in there. And another one is as I continued on into my college years, I would say that, science, man, I'm thinking, college science, biology, all this stuff, all this math, all this, statistics and all of these things. Well, if I would not have had the teachers in my life that did everything they could to nurture me and be patient with me, and just do everything they could to bring Lance just another day closer to where he needed to be, then I would not have been able to get the education that I have.
Well, you said it a little bit earlier, is that folks saw something in you that you couldn't see in yourself at that time.
Yeah.
And if you're good enough to recognize that, even if you don't recognize it at the time, but they've established a relationship with you, there are times you will do those things as a young person just because of that relationship. Yeah. That will allow you to progress in a way that you don't see the connection to your future.
Yep.
I think we do a better job of that a little bit in some aspects. I'm going to be real frank. It all depends upon the teacher, and also the system, the processes that are set up that allow that. I mean, we've got a thing called an individual plan of study now. Yeah. That's a requirement, and one of the State Board of Education goals, and one of their features for accreditation has been centered around individual plan of study. There's a lot of things there that we can do in that system piece, but it all comes back to, you talked about, you had the math in your shop class, right? I mean, holy cow, what a great way to learn how to apply mathematics, especially, my assumption is you probably are really good with conceptual mathematics, but maybe some of the other things, they just didn't click necessarily. Yep. I mean, and we've all got those dead spots, whether it's math or, even English language arts or whatever it is, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. But you can learn to overcome them and apply those in different reasons. I've got, or different senses. I've got two brothers, a brother older and a brother younger. My older brother runs a roustabout rig moving service in southwest Kansas, and has for years. He's always been an oil field guy. Yeah. If you can't do math for him, you're not going to be real successful, especially when you've got to go out and tally pipe. Yes. Because it's not tallying pipe with a traditional tape measure, and I always forget this kind of stuff, but you've got feet, but then the other measurements are not in inches, they're in the tenth of feet, because it's easier to add the darn things up, right? Yep. So, I mean, you have to be able to apply those kinds of things, and I think we lose sight sometimes. There is that balance between the raw skills that you have to acquire to be able to develop a deep understanding for a topic. So, we talk about you have to know your math facts. Well, knowing your math facts just reduces your cognitive load in order to be able to apply those math facts in other senses.
Yeah.
Those of us that are more conceptual, and I think that's why I loved geometry so much, because when I worked construction, it was great when those guys were teaching you how to lay out a house using 2 tape measures, right, and some pins, and things of that nature. So, there's just a lot that goes into being in the profession of education, and we've got some wonderful educators in the world. We just need more of them.
Yeah. And we got some wonderful educators in Newton.
Oh, yes.
While I was, I don't know if you know my history here, but while I was doing my master's degree, I had the opportunity to teach public speaking. And I'm good at public speaking. I never would have thought in a million years that public speaking is like literally, people are more afraid of getting up and standing in front of people and speaking than almost dying. I mean, you can't even think that might be the case. And I just remember as I was walking through that time that I learned a lot about what us as educators can do, because we can either make or break this student. And there was other teachers that I just was like, whoa, I would take a different approach with this, because the goal is that we all cross this finish line together, and that these people that are there are better public speakers today than when they started the class. And now I do some substitute teaching, not often, but at USD 373, and it's really just a time in which I get to learn a tremendous amount about educators and where they're at, because being a substitute teacher is in no way, shape, or form close to being somebody that is in there, I say in the trenches on the daily. And there are times in which I'm like, wow, this is really challenging and would be very challenging for some of our educators. And it just gives me a perspective of what kind of a job they are tasked with and how effective some really are. And so I want to say, there's a lot of great teachers. I mean, I watch them. I'm an observant person, and then I realize that, there's a lot of youth that do just fine in that kind of setting, and there's some that don't do so fine. Like I was somebody that didn't do so fine. I'm more of a outside, out doing the thing kind of a guy, and that comes back to the aspect of administrative duties, right? So for you, when you became a superintendent, first off, when was that? And then explain to me how that changed even your perspective then, from going from an educator to a principal and now to a superintendent, what your role was and how your past education and duties helped you succeed in that position.
Well, that's kind of an interesting question, because like in each one of the jobs that I've had, you were never prepared based upon the educational experiences you had for what was coming up, right? I mean, my emphasis at my whole career has been on student learning. It really has. It's not that budget is not important. It's tremendously important, especially, as a superintendent. That's one of your major roles, is to make sure from a fiscal perspective you are solvent, make sure that you are allocating resources in the way you're supposed to. And being an old science teacher and loving applied mathematics, I really love spreadsheets. I hate to say I love spreadsheets, because that's a dumb thing to say. But I love being able to take information and data and put it in ways that make sense for me to be able to look at, okay, where can we do things differently or better? Or how are we making sure that we have the resources and allocating those resources in a way that are supporting students? The processes on the superintendent side, with respect to, in my first job, there were 3 people in my office. Okay, there was myself, my board clerk, and then there was a person called the program coordinator who did everything else. And it was just really a division of labor between myself and my board clerk with respect to the budget process in and of itself. As a new superintendent, you don't know. Yeah. Okay, if you're in 3 different counties, you've got mill levies from 3 different county offices, and you've got all these different little things that you have to keep up with, and you've got all these little deadlines that are on a calendar from the Kansas State Department of Education of all the reports that need to be done. It's like it's hard to describe the role, right? It really, really is. But the whole time I have tried to remain centered on we're here to improve student learning. And it's not at the expense of the educators involved at all. I want to support the educators, but our focus is on making sure that our students have what they need when they leave, and we're making education more relevant for them. I was lucky in my first district. It was at Twin Valley, which is north of Salina, with Bennington and Teskett. Had a pretty progressive board on a lot of levels. They were a good mix of youth and experience, so young and old,
respectively.
They really wanted to see students realizing their potential in that rural community. So we were able to do the things we got into redesign when the State Department of Education first came out with that in 2017, I believe it was. We were an entry school. We were called a Mercury school. We had 2 different schools in my district that were among that, but we did all of the things together at the same time. So I mean, it's hard to really kind of quantify or qualify the differences between when you're going up that supposed ladder, but they are all totally different jobs. You're in a principal role, you're middle management. I mean, you're taking it from all angles. You've got the kids that are chewing on you. You've got parents that are chewing on you. You got teachers, and you got old cranky superintendents, and you've got the board above that. So you're true middle management, and and principals in this day and age, especially when I look at my elementary principals, really up through 5th grade, but especially our pre-K4, they are, they are so darn busy. The increased behaviors that we've all talked about. I mean, across the state, God bless them. They just have to work so hard and do so many different things. They are more managers sometimes than the instructional leaders that they want to be. And you talked about having good educators. If we didn't have good educators, our principals would struggle more. It's each one of those at each one of those perches, it's a lot different type of position, and you learn on the job. And there are support networks that are out there that can help you. You've got to be willing to ask the questions, and I'm not afraid to ask questions if I don't know an answer.
Well, being vulnerable is half the battle, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then all of a sudden, here comes Fred to USD 373.
Yeah.
When you were came here, applied, and looked at the potential to take the job, what kind of was in your mind at that time? What did you see as USD 373 going into it? And I guess, for lack of a better question, why go ahead and say, you know what, I can make the type of impact that I believe is necessary here at 373?
One thing that we are so fortunate to have here is the access, with being a kind of a metro community. We're still far enough away where we're kind of a small town and pretty self-contained. We have a tremendous career and tech ed program. I know that folks, hear about that often. I don't think that they really understand the depths at which our career and tech ed program has in terms of an impact on the area communities. We service
economy.
Like 12 different schools that send their kids here for our programs. So, I said this I think it might have been even at a board meeting. One of the issues with being in that smaller district is you didn't have the resources, but we were agile. We could make changes fairly quickly, and those changes, we can see some results fairly quickly based upon those changes. Not necessarily in state assessment scores and stuff, but you can change a schedule and it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
So it's like, being in a little, 12-foot skiff with a trolling motor.
Yeah.
Here, sometimes it's almost like we're big enough to where it's almost like a battleship with a trolling motor on it. So to make that change, it can be very hard because of the layers of things that you have to go through compared to there. But it's still not like a 259. It's not like even a Mays or a Goddard because of the number of schools that they have and the size that they have. But it's still it's difficult. Because of the number of layers that are there, but at least we have the layers. Not the layers. We when when I made that statement about a trolling motor on a battleship, we have a battleship.
Yeah.
We don't have the 12-foot skiff.
Right.
We have those resources. We have CTE resources accessible. We have AP classes at the high school level. We offer every activity on Keisha's docket. I mean, our kids have access to everything that they need here. And we have a very supportive community. When I look at, the mental health resources, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
We have that relationship with Prairie View through that mental health improvement team grant, but we had that even before that through COVID. So when I signed the contract, it was February of 2020, though.
Yeah.
March 2020 is when COVID hit. I'm telling you, that was the worst time in the world to make a transition as a superintendent from a district that you knew to one you didn't know, and a whole set of situations that you just were not prepared for.
Yeah.
So it's been a difficult 4 years on a lot of levels, rewarding on many too.
Well, and I just got to tell you, I'm glad, having watched us as a community in a school district walk through COVID, because it was something that was completely foreign to everybody. What we do, I mean, that sent everybody back on their heels. I'm telling you. And granted, we can't say, well, you did a better job during COVID than, well, I did a better job during COVID, because there's no comparison. You cannot compare any situation to its own unique thing. And I'll just tell you, as a parent, and my own personal perspective with kids that are going to school, that I really am appreciative of the leadership that you've shown, of how that was handled, both at an administrative level and I mean, you're not in control of what the school board does, and that we're not in control of what the county chooses, and the state, and then the federal government, obviously. But you, as the superintendent, well, the buck stops with you. And whether or not a decision is made that you're for or not for, you are the one to make sure that it gets walked out in the best possible form and fashion that's going to be the most beneficial to our children. And I just got to say, Fred, I really appreciate that.
Well, I thank you. I don't know if I believe you. That much in terms of,
believe it. It's true. It's coming from my heart. Whether you think you did a good job, you did.
I've got a lot of people that work in that district that do a great job of assuming the responsibilities and the roles they need to. The Board of Education, those 7 individuals, that was a very turbulent time, because no matter what you did, half of the people were mad at you.
Yeah.
And every decision that was made, we were like the second school in the state of Kansas that through that Senate Bill 40 with the mask mandate stuff that was in district court, that kind of stuff. So there were a lot of people that did a lot of things. Our nurse Lehman, who was the head nurse at that time, I mean, what a trooper with respect to working through all of the things that we never thought we would ever be doing. So, you got to remember, I work for 7 bosses. Okay. I've got a Board of Education. There's not one of them that is my boss. So all 7 of those really, I think there were 13 special meetings that year, in addition to the normally scheduled meetings. They showed a tremendous amount of leadership and just stick-with-itness that a lot of folks, they didn't have to endure, but boy, they were darn sure good about judging what was taking place. So I thank you. It wasn't me. It was really the people that I work with that did the heavy lifting with all that stuff.
Well, leadership goes a long way. I'll tell you that.
It matters sometimes.
It does.
Every once in a while. On Tuesdays it matters.
Okay, so just some questions. I have just a couple questions that I generally ask everybody when it comes to whatever their forte is, if it's city management or whoever I'm interviewing. Just a very general question. What do you think what do you think is the biggest challenge that USD 373 is facing going into the future?
I think it's recognizing the fact that the clientele that we serve, we have to do things a little differently to ensure that they have the skills necessary to be successful on the outside world. We have 40% of our kids that are in what they call that level 1 in ELA and mathematics. Level 1 is not a good level to be in. That's the lowest performance level. There are 4 performance levels. That second performance level, when you look at the correlations to other data points, and those other data points are graduation rate. They are ACT for math and English, and some other data points. A level 2, some organizations want to say that's not performing, well. Okay, I don't agree with that totally, because there's a lot of kids that score level 2 on a state assessment that do just fine in a post-secondary world. Yeah. But level 1 is not cool. I mean, we've got, and that's one of the good things that over the course of the last 2.5 years, we did a lot towards the end of my first year, but especially during my second year. COVID was still there, but we were able to do some things where we have 3 goal areas that I'm very happy about that we're trying to focus on. And that one is core instruction. If you've got 40% of your kids in the lowest performance level on any assessment, that's not a student issue. That's a system issue from a core instruction perspective that we need to address. People want to say then the teachers aren't doing their job. That's not accurate. The teachers are working themselves ragged trying to see kids being successful in their courses. There are a lot of factors that play into state assessments, especially at the secondary level. There's not a lot of skin in the game there for kids. Why do I perform well on this? It means nothing. I think there's some things that can be done to change some of that, but that's a state level issue that I keep fighting with some folks about. But your third, fourth, and fifth grade kids, especially third and fourth grade kids, they want to do well.
Yeah.
And they're going to give you everything they can. So if they are not performing well, it's because, we haven't taught it, or we haven't taught it to a level to where they can be successful. I want to be very careful to really emphasize the fact that a test score is just a test score. Yeah. It is not a kid.
Yeah.
Okay. But a test score is a proxy for learning of some sort. Now, I have told staff this kind of stuff repeatedly, and I'll say it over and over again. If we have 40% of our kids that are performing at level 1, but we have high assessment scores in other areas, whether it's chronic absenteeism, whether it's ACT. If we had a 40% in level 1, but our average ACT was a 29, I wouldn't pay a bit of attention to that. If we had a larger percentage of our kids way up there on that ACT, because that's what folks, at least not so much anymore, because that's being diminished a little bit, the importance of that. But that's where some of your money comes in when you start looking at post-secondary. Post-secondary shouldn't only be considered college, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of other post-secondary paths, and I'm a firm believer in the trades. But when you have several different data points, we're level 1 performance here. Our chronic absenteeism rate is way too high. We don't have tremendously high ACT average. Our graduation rate is okay, but it's not stellar. Well, that's a system issue that we need to continue to address. So within that core instructional goal area, we're making sure that our standards are aligned to state standards. We're trying to get on the path of using data to more inform our instructional decisions in the classroom. Because I've made this statement in a lot of different groups. It doesn't matter what I do in my office. It matters what is happening in that classroom when that door's closed. Yeah. That's what matters. There's no teacher that wants to do a poor job of teaching. There's no parent that's going to send anything other than their best to school. Yeah. And so we've got to figure out where, from a data perspective, those issues lie, and we have to attack those in a way that makes sense from a planning perspective. So this past year, we started utilizing a thing called interim assessments too, to help create kind of more of a sense of urgency because on a state assessment, you don't get anything back that's actionable. Yeah. It's a summative assessment. You get a score. You get a little bit, but it's not actionable. So this year in grades 3 through 8, and then one at the high school for ELA, but 3 through 8 in mathematics, they've got these interim assessments that we have been using. There were 3 different times during the course of the year, and teachers are breaking down those actual individual scores to see, oh, wait a minute, why did we score so poorly here? So we tried to put them in groups to where, and they've always had collaborative groups, but we're trying to be more intentional about the conversations they're having. Hey, your kids seem to score well here. Mine did not. What did you do differently than I did instructionally? Cool. So that's the kind of the system approach that I think that we're trying to take more, and that's where the leadership does come into play, and that we've got to help steer that direction. But those goal areas that we've established, I think, are strong. Now, we've talked over the course of the last few months about we need to probably add another one or two around facilities and then fiscal planning, because with declining enrollment, in order to remain competitive, when you are smaller, you have to be smaller somehow.
Yeah.
You can't maintain the status quo in terms of personnel and staffing if you've lost 500 kids in the last 7, 8, 9 years. So those are just really hard things, though, because no one wants to see anybody lose a job.
Yeah.
When you take away, it just is really hard. Change is very difficult. And I just don't enjoy that. But we've got to be more intentional about those planning pieces.
Okay. Another question that I always ask is, and give me one. What is the best thing that USD 373 has going for them?
Just one, huh? Okay. Yeah. Well, the best thing we have going for us, frankly, is the people that we have working for us.
Yeah.
I mean, people run programs that run themselves. Legacy stuff only works for a while if you don't have the right people in the seats. So that's what we have going for us. I mean, and I'll give you another one, though. I don't care.
Okay, have at it.
our location, our proximity that we have to the metro area, and the things that we have accessible to us just locally within the type of community we have, we have what we need.
Yeah.
We do, and we've got to start leveraging that at a higher level.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, Fred, we're coming to the end of the program, and as always, I give the guest the last word to speak directly to the hearts and minds of anybody listening. What do you got for us, Fred?
I hope that the school community really understands, what they have in the school community in and of itself. I mentioned earlier that we're not a small school. I mean, we're not a large school, but we're definitely not small. We're among the top 64 in the state of Kansas. But we have a unique demographic that we serve of students. And those aren't excuses for performance at all. Those should be opportunities that we celebrate. I really want folks to begin assuming more good intent. I have 7 people, like I mentioned earlier, that are my bosses. They all have 7 different personalities. They have 7 different ways of looking at things, but they all have to come together to help us form those goal areas and that direction we're taking them in. And I just hope our school community begins to recognize, if we want to be viable in the future, we're going to have to make some difficult decisions really every year if we continue the slide of declining enrollment. But it shouldn't be at the expense of the people that are in that system that still need to have a viable way to serve their own families. Yeah. And those are conversations where we've been having the last couple of months, and it's really hard, and it's easy to second guess. But there's never one right decision. There are right decisions that you can make, and they are doing the best we can. So if you could show some grace towards, the policymakers, the board members, and the decisions that are being made, but just really appreciate your school community to a higher level, because there are some amazing people that work here, and they give their heart and soul to the school community and to their students. Being a teacher, there's an emotional attachment, not to your content, but to the students you serve, that you can't understand unless you've been one. And it's easy to say that, but they're doing that. They're bringing their best every day, and in a difficult environment, from a political perspective, all the way down to what's going on in some homes, in some families. And they deserve a pat on the back, those people in the classrooms. So that's all I got.
All right. Well, thank you, Fred.
Yes.
I appreciate you coming out and sharing your heart with everybody.
Absolutely.
So
thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
Right on.
Well, folks, there you have it. And thanks for listening to this episode of Harvey County Talk. Our guest on the program was Superintendent of USD 373, Fred Van Ranken, and I was your host, Lance Gormley. Catch you next time.